I just got an email for this week's tune that I'm going to be playing over. I'm going to be interviewing Nahre, and she just sent the song that we're going to check out. So I'm going to play over this. I haven't heard it yet, so I'm going to play it, and let's see what's up. Ooh, that is gonna be fun. I have hella ideas already. Welcome, everyone, to the Yamaha Behind the Synths podcast. I'm your temporary guest host, Nicholas Semrad, and with me we have the legend herself, Miss Nahre. And we're actually meeting for the first time right now, so hello.
Nice to meet you, Nick.
Yeah, nice
It's
to
a pleasure.
you as well. We were just talking right before we started on how you just moved to LA from New York. It's kind of, you said just on a whim, right?
Yeah, it wasn't really planned, and I wasn't really sure where I was going to be. Everything was in flux last year, I think, for a lot of people. So I just wanted to be closer to family, which is why I just decided to. I actually drove across the continent
Amazing.
from Canada, crossed over all
That's
the way from Toronto.
what was that experience like? I would imagine that you probably went through like some really beautiful things and some really like iffy things.
No, it was actually really straightforward
Amazing.
because nothing was open and it was kind of at the height of the pandemic. So I just was focused on driving
Hmm.
every day for, I think, from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then I just slept and repeated this 4 days. And then I was in SoCal. I didn't
That's
really see anything really. It was just on the road. Kind
yeah.
of a boring way to do it, but I
Sure.
just felt like getting the task done.
Yeah, and I feel like that's something, it's like you get an interesting perspective of the country that way, you know. I'm actually, weirdly enough, I'm doing the same thing tomorrow, but on a train. I'm going to New York and I'm taking a train all the way, so I'll get to share that with you.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, question, when you're traveling, whether it's by train or plane, do you have the habit of carrying with you instruments and you have your gear that you
It's
take, which is
it,
portable, or
I do. So when I tour, it's been tricky in my situation because I do a lot of like synth programming. And backline, you can always try and get a synthesizer sent to you. And it kind of depends on the gig and just the type of sound design I have to do for it. But depending on how deep the sound design requirements go, like sometimes you need the exact keyboard. And luckily with Yamaha stuff, it's pretty readily available. But if I'm using, like, I also work with, another synth company, and if I'm using something of theirs, it's like a little bit harder to get. So I kind of just had the habit of like bringing my stuff with me, which is an absolute nightmare. I don't know. Have you ever
imagine?
done the like bring a hard case with you scenario?
No, I haven't. I actually am horrible with cases, and it's something that I've experimented with.
Mm,
I've have I had, oh, I have one hard case. Yes.
mm,
No. Let me scratch my answer. I have traveled with the hard case only once, and that was when I was transporting my CP88 from New York to California.
mm.
Um, so I shipped that first. Um,
And
I've
that's
hop
a
around
huge
so
hard.
much. I was living in New York
Mhm.
while I was visiting Toronto. And that's when I decided to move to California. So I had to find a way to ship all of my stuff from New York
Oh my
to
God.
California. And I did it via, uh, I don't know, I forget the brand, but it's just one of those hard, hefty cases.
Yeah.
And I just did it via airline. Actually, my brother helped me.
Yeah.
Other than that, I always rely on soft cases just because
Mhm.
I tend to carry a lot of stuff
Sure.
and it gets really heavy.
Yeah.
But I've learned my lesson. Some soft cases really don't do anything.
Oh no.
So,
Were you doing the New York like backpack keyboard experience? Did you ever have to do that?
oh yeah, all the time.
Because that thing slaughters cases, like especially soft.
Oh, I've had several different types of backpacks. A
Hmm.
lot of them they won't hold the keyboard in
Mhm.
full, so it would kind of stick out. And you know what I've done also is carry around keyboards, the small ones,
Hmm.
in yoga mat bags
Oh my God.
because it's the perfect size. It has zero protection for the instrument,
Yeah,
but in terms of carrying it, it gets the job done.
that's brilliant.
So I went through that phase.
I feel like I took my you also have one of the little refaces, right? You have the seat
I
belt.
do. I
I was
do.
using a like a pedal board case for a minute for that, and then you can also fit
Oh,
it in like a DJ bag. Like DJs will put, like portable turntables in, and it fits in there perfectly. But yeah, the big ones, I feel like that's part of if you're a New York musician and you haven't dealt with like a soft case pairing like mid subway trip, you're not really a New York musician yet. You have to go through that rite of passage, like trying to catch your board coming out of the bottom of the soft case or
all, all the way from Harlem to, I don't know, Park Slope. You're
Oh
just
yeah, you're just it's like resting on
1
your
a.m.
foot. Oh God. I will say that I mean granted the world's in flux right now, so even that probably doesn't happen as much anymore, but that's the part of LA
True.
that I have really grown attached to, especially coming from New York. Is just the ability to like take a car somewhere or to not have to do the subway experience with gear because it's really intense and I feel like a lot of people don't realize how intense it is until they don't have to do it anymore. Have you dealt with any of that? Have you like how's your experience? You've
That's
been here.
that's so true. Actually, it's interesting to get your perspective on this because I was kind of feeling the opposite because
Mm,
of course it's such a grind. It's really rough on the body too because at the end of the day a lot of times what you did musically doesn't wear you out. What you had to do in terms of how to get the gear there,
yeah.
that's the part that really exhausts you. But also for me, it kind of adds a little bit of grit and a little bit of intensity to whatever I'm doing. And I got used to feeding off of that
Oh
and
wow.
um, feeling, I don't know, just really connected with what you're doing in a very physical way. It's maybe a bit masochistic, but I just kind of like the fact that you're getting sweaty and all
Yeah.
of this.
Yeah.
And I kind of miss that because here I feel like a lot of time is spent um, idly kind of in traffic. And
Mm,
nowadays, traffic is getting worse again.
sure.
So there's a lot of time spent in the car. Maybe it could just be simply a comparison of car versus public transit.
Yeah.
But I'm getting used to the car.
It's
But the car you could do a lot of things in, which you
yeah.
can't in the subway.
It's definitely a more physical connection.
Right.
It's interesting to hear that because that really makes sense. And I've been searching for since I've been here, I've been searching for like what's the difference because there is one. There's a very like tangible difference, even not even just on like a subjective experience, but I think even on like objective sound between LA cats and New York cats. Like I always used to joke that I especially in kind of improvisation land, like you can hear it. You can hear someone and kind of like where they're from and what they went through. And maybe that's part of the New York thing is like, all right, everyone who's playing is like already kind of been through 4 rounds of like a boxing match before they even get on stage. And I don't know, maybe that explains it. That's an interesting Think.
Wait, I'm super interested in this topic,
Yeah, yeah.
and I want your perspective on this.
Hmm.
What do you think, if there is a specific or set of specific things related to this, it makes someone sound West Coast versus East Coast? In whatever, I mean, there are many genres, but
Sure.
maybe let's say improvising,
Yeah,
jazz.
I think you can hear it in jazz. I think you can hear it in R&B. I think you can hear it in hip hop. I mean, even to a certain extent in rock music, which was weirdly enough why I moved to New York, was like you hear these very like groggy, kind of like gross. Even the bands that weren't groggy still were groggy. They still like they sounded like they smelled funny. Like they sounded like they had this like funk about them. And LA, like I think about bands like the Beach Boys or something where it's like the Beach Boys are top 20 band of all time in my eyes, or one of them. But they sound very shiny. They sound like, oh yeah, your day probably is going good or going well. Like you're definitely having a good day. And so I don't know. Yeah, I feel like there's an attitude difference, and I think those things, and it probably translates in every genre, but especially in improvisation world, just because it's so tied to kind of like personality.
Mm.
Um, I think you can tell the like kind of shared. I mean, I hate to just posit it as like a dark side of things, but it's dark. Like people in New York, it's hard to live there.
Oh,
Like even people who are really happy in New York, their happiness comes in spite of some level of like shared suffering of like this city.
right.
It's like great to live in, but it also kind of sucks to live in, and that's why it's great. Um, and you don't really,
Totally.
yeah, yeah, you don't really catch that as much here. And it's not really, I try not to place like a value judgment on it because I think there's places for both. I think early Nick would have been like, yeah, the New York one is way harder. But now I'm growing to appreciate the kind of like, nah, there is a bright side. And I think you hear that in West Coast music quite a bit. I don't know, what's your take on it?
I think you're right. I feel the same way. I think it has a lot to do with pacing, and there's a different pace of life, West Coast to East Coast in general. I mean, city to city, it's very different. But if you compare LA to New York, just the way that one interacts with the city itself is very different. New York, a lot of times, even if you are in, I don't know, let's say the highest end of things where you're in a penthouse and you're farther away from the sidewalk, it's
Hmm.
still just an elevator ride, and then you're just boom in the city.
Yeah.
Or even if you're in the car, you're interacting with the city right away.
Mm.
Um, Generally speaking.
Yeah.
And here it's, get in the car, the driveway, a lot of places aren't as urban
Mm.
unless you're in downtown LA. And even that is very different from downtown Manhattan or
Mhm.
the calmer parts of New York. And there's this buffer of getting from the neighborhood to the streets and
Mhm.
then the streets to the highways,
Mhm.
and there's just a different and the way that you interact with your neighbors and your friends socially is also different, I think.
Sure.
um, Disclaimer, I've grew up here
Hmm.
until I went to college,
Okay.
and then I was away for over a decade. And then I've only been back for 6 months, and
Mm.
my experience here has been colored by the pandemic. So it's
Sure.
different. And I have a different lifestyle, I think, than many people. But still, just as a general observation, that pace is different. I think it kind of shows up in the music in
Mm.
terms of the abruptness that is accepted and kind of leaned into. um, I'm going to keep saying, generally speaking,
Mhm.
of the musicians on the East Coast versus the West Coast, and
Yeah.
the grooves are different. And this is probably a really loose and uh, irrelevant theory, but I just noticed myself listening to a lot of music in the car.
Mm.
And the car, depending on where you are, especially when you're driving on the freeway, there's a an underlying frequency that is always
Yeah.
present,
Hmm.
that certain tracks I noticed get buried. The important parts of the track are buried in that frequency, and so I find myself listening to different types of tracks in the car than I'm used to, in my earbuds on the subway or wherever in the plane, where it's just my headphones.
Mm.
And maybe that has some sort of influence on the types of textures and sounds that people gravitate towards, but I'm not really sure.
No, I think you're onto something. I mean, because I mean, this is just personal experience, but like I feel like out here I haven't had yet this like. I mean, I've been out here 4 years maybe, and I haven't really had like a deep or at least many deep experiences with like remembering like listening to a song and what was happening during it. Like I've had wonderful musical experiences out here. Like LA has definitely has things in nature that like New York's not going to touch, and you kind of get in touch with yourself personally there. But like I remember so many moments where it would be like going to some super early, like early for me would be like 10 a.m. But like some like 10 a.m. rehearsal in the city, and I'm listening to like Bon Iver or like some Radiohead record or something, and it just and this ties into the previous point you were making too, where you're in the thick of the kind of chaos of the city, and you have no choice. You just have to be that. Whereas the car, it gives you like a specific sonic buffer, but it's quite literally a shield from everything around you. And so I would listen to like this Bon Iver song, and it's so cinematic where I'm in the subway watching people just do their thing. It's very movie esque, and I haven't really experienced that out here as much. I mean, maybe some nature experiences like going on hikes and listening to things, and like, all right, we hit the top of the mountain, and like, yeah, this is a vibe or whatever. But it's very different because it's not tied into people and the energy that comes from people. Like it's a really different thing, you know. Yeah, it's
Definitely.
so interesting to be able to like kind of navigate that whole thing because it you hear a lot of people talk about it, and talk about, oh yeah, we can hear a difference, but being able to explain it is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just something that I was thinking about, because I kind of I won't say that I can tell when someone's from the East or West Coast. That's really hard to do. But as a collective, when I think of, let's say, a dozen musicians from the LA area versus a dozen musicians from the New York area,
Mhm.
um, there is something that separates them,
Mhm.
and both are very interesting in their own rights.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I feel like just in the way that I've kind of entered into music and how I've navigated like different mental health things and how to tie them into music. I think I'm still a little more comfortable when I hear someone who brings that kind of like can connect with both the like I'm happy and I'm celebrating and I'm dancing, and also can connect with the like life is really hard. There's something comforting about like, oh yeah, this person gets it. So especially if I'm playing and I show that end of myself, it's not gonna like weird them out, or and maybe they'll even be able to interact with it. And there definitely have been experiences in LA that I've had, and maybe this isn't just an LA thing, but there have been experiences I've had on gigs out here where I've kind of gone the dark path, even improvisationally through jazz or whatever, and people just don't. They're like, you kind of see them like step back a little bit, and I would imagine that thing kind of exists even in improvisational genres. I think something like classical, you're probably going to see that out here too. I think like, I have a lot of friends doing orchestra work that I would imagine the same thing applies. I mean, maybe not, but
Yeah, I think so.
yeah. So interesting how I feel like all that stuff is hearable. I don't know. That actually it brings to mind something else. I have sorry, I have my little list of topics here. Um, so I was watching videos of yours trying to get acquainted with like the way you talk about things, the way you teach, and everything. And you in one of your videos you mentioned that you've been trying to kind of dive over the past few years, like dive into learning how to improvise a little bit more and dive into that world. And you talked a lot about like how improvisation like was actually a big piece of the classical puzzle for a long time, and it was a really great conversation. I encourage everyone who's listening to this to check that out. It was with a drummer who I'm totally spacing on the name of, but it was a great conversation.
Was it was it
It was the NPR
part of
thing.
Soundfield?
Yes, yes.
Soundfield PBS, yeah. It was
Yes.
probably with Arthur Buckner and
Okay.
Adam Neely. I think
Yeah.
he was part of that episode.
Yeah. It was a really great thought, and it brought to mind this like. Well, actually, let me preface this with a question. Do you teach?
I do.
You
I
do.
mean, in many different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't do as many private one-to-one lessons anymore. But yeah, definitely spend a lot of time teaching.
Word. Okay. So something that, and I'm not sure if you get this, or maybe you get the opposite version of it than I do, but something that I deal with a lot of is having people from one genre want to learn another one. And given that I do a lot of improvised music, a lot of my students who are asking me that are like, I grew up playing classical and now I want to dive into this thing. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, because I've the way that I've tried to posit it that at least worked for me was that there's this kind of like chaos order philosophical dichotomy that kind of permeates through. I mean, it's not just music, it's kind of everything, but especially in music I've found that the people that I enjoy the most, the people who have kind of reached me musically the deepest, have been people who kind of like live in one of those but have reached over into the other one just enough to like flavor their playing. And so one of the ways that I teach this is like, okay, if you're just classical, you have to kind of take note of the things that you're doing that live in like order land, and so it's things like like sheet music could be an example of like, here's an ordered way of doing this exact thing. Or I mean, I think to a certain extent even like practice routines are kind of like an ordered thought. And so I always encourage them, you don't want to like just run to the other side, because if you're so used to being 100% ordered and you just dive into chaos, like you're going to be a mess. And I think vice versa, that also happens. But yeah, I always encourage them to, like, all right, take one thing, like give yourself 9 rules, and then have one where there's no rules, and you have to very intentionally like just be free with it. Like, tell me your thoughts on this. Do you ever think about that kind of shift, and has that been something that you've noticed kind of as you've started to dive into like improvisation world?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of um, differences in just the approach of understanding what is it you're trying to do here as a musician in front of an instrument. You can make sound. Uh, to put it simply, like what's your role here? What is possible? And I think it's very different when you have a score in front of you where a composer predetermined, here are the notes, here are the rhythms, and this is what I want you to play, note for note, versus here's a general structure, a lead sheet or a set of chords, and improvise, or maybe nothing,
Mhm.
completely, just do your thing.
Mhm.
I find that a lot of classically trained or classical based musicians and students that come to me and ask me what my approach in shifting from one to the next is. And I try my best to help them understand what's driving the core, what's anchoring each approach, because that's what's helped me. And if I could use a metaphor, it's almost like looking at a little hut or a house
Mm.
where classical music, the structure, internal structure, the scaffolding, all of that, that's already taken care of. That's just predetermined,
Mhm.
and it's fixed. And as it is in the other side, but focusing here, um, there are a lot of elaborate things on the outside. You know, the shape of the doors and the intricate little designs of the wood and
Mhm.
everything about, and the color, and you're trying your best to try and, I guess, replicate that and pay respect to the design and all of these details that the composer put in place.
Mhm.
And so in trying to replicate that, maybe you're not as focused on what's inside because it's really about the whole shape.
Mhm.
Whereas when you're improvising, you really have to know the skeletal structure in order to elaborate on it, and that's your original contribution.
Mhm.
And because you have freedom within constraints and certain parameters, depending on how you're improvising, but um, you really have to understand it from inside out to
Mhm.
do that. And because of that, it's kind of hard to shift over. Let's say you're used to doing that. All of a sudden, you're asked to be precise and consistent and accurate about where each little, curve is, and exactly how many planks of wood. There's less freedom there.
Sure.
And once I started to understand that, I began to change my approach when I'm improvising, because at first I always just thought, oh my gosh, I need to fit into some sort of convention. And these people, they sound a certain way. And I'm not really sure how they do that. Let me try to figure that out. Do I
Mhm.
need to copy? Like they all sound similar. Why is that? And I was trying to look at the notes themselves. Oh, they do these little figures and they use these chords. But that was always just padding the surface. And then once I started to understand more that, oh, I need to really internalize what's going on inside and
Mhm.
understand the structure, and even if it's not very hyper music theory focused, just sitting back and listening to the song and maybe their lyrics, just internalizing it as a whole and seeing, oh, this is how that cadence kind of feels, and
Mhm.
rises and falls, and then this part of the song is different in this way. And once I started doing that, it kind of helped me a lot more. I think that that shift is difficult, though.
Yeah.
Definitely is.
Yeah, it's what, and I think to a certain extent, I mean, and you alluded to this, but the preparation for both is just,
Mm.
it's the absolute opposite, and that's where I see a lot of people kind of like melt, um, for lack of a better term, is even just on the preparation side, like I took 15 years of Suzuki classical, which is still way more like ear based, and so I still struggle with reading to this day. But it was something where, at least knowing, like, okay, practicing this measure to a metronome and then these two measures to a metronome or something, or like, thinking of everything kind of like just in a more structured way of like, okay, you have to accomplish this goal and here's each piece, and then you can start pushing them together or however you practice. That stuff helped me when I got into jazz land because I had a framework of which to throw it on. And I think a lot of people who are, who, and again, maybe I'm generalizing here, but people who are super into improvised music, they're into it because it's free, to a certain extent. It's like, okay, you know, it's as free as a conversation. Like this conversation, we could go anywhere, but we sort of have like, okay, you asked this question, and so I'm responding in kind, blah blah blah. So there's still a sort of a framework, and if I just randomly started talking about basketball, it'd be weird, right? And so so these people, fans of that music, latch onto that thing, and so when they get into it and they realize that there's no framework on which to learn it, I think that's where people go like, oh, now what do we do? And so that's why I kind of started thinking about the chaos order thing, because I feel like, I mean, you're touching on this, like if you come from a planet of here's everything you have to do, and you're not kind of looking at like the non-instructional parts, like what does this feel like where are the phrases as a whole, like what's the kind of like broader harmonic framework of this thing. Those are all very chaotic things to think about. I mean, emotion by itself is just the most chaotic thing there is. And I feel like the reverse of that is like all the people trying to do jazz. It's like, all right, find a way to order it. Like, how can we turn this one expression into something that you can like mechanize, or what's the word I'm looking for? Like, put it into a box of like, okay, when this happens, I can do this, like a situational framework. And I feel like that's the thing that helped me through that. And it sounds like kind of you're doing this similar vibe, which is rad.
Definitely. And speaking of I guess music specific, uh or to take it into a music specific context, a lot of times I think it just helps to start with the tightest framework, where
Mm-hmm.
the only option you have is maybe one note, and
Yeah.
even the rhythm is constrained.
Mm-hmm.
Just use one note, and don't even go beyond this type of rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
And then be as creative as you want. And then when you exhaust that, where you understand, okay, I can be free within these constraints, then introduce another note or another small little opening. And then I feel like that process of going from having such little option to so many options
Mm-hmm.
is less daunting, because the worst thing is if you take someone, and even if you ask that of yourself, who is not used to improvising, and all of a sudden says, okay, um, improvise something, just go. It's like, okay,
Provide.
what?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
and
No,
and I think even when there's a very solid framework for a song or a track or whatever it is, you still have so many options, and a lot of times it kind of paralyzes you, and that I've noticed that for myself a lot.
very much. Yeah, it's a really great thing to think about. I used to use this. Do you know this book called? It's called like, I'm not normally a book guy, but there's a book called Ted Reed's Syncopation for the Modern Drummer. Do you know this book?
No, but it sounds really interesting.
It's hilarious. So I think it was written as like marching band exercises, but essentially it's like it's it's a very ordered, like just book of every written rhythm, like basically in four, like everything you could do. So the first page is like, here's every version of quarter notes and a bar of four. So it would be like the first bar is like 1, 2, 3, 4. The next one is 1, 2, 3, rest. Second one is 1, 2, rest, so on and so on. And then at the end of the page, they do an exercise where they kind of randomly throw one of each of those in a 16 bar phrase or something like that. But I used to have students who came from reading and it could read well, and were used to kind of that more structured way of thinking. Like say like, okay, play these rhythms and just pick, like you said, pick one note, and maybe try and dip it down to just dynamics. Or like if that's, if you get to where that's easy, it's like, okay, now improvise in C major pentatonic, but just on these rhythms. And I think you're right. I think there's definitely something to like the little bit vibe of like, let me introduce a little chaos, and then once that doesn't drive you crazy, then a little more. then a little more. Yeah, and those drills, they seem, I think, to people on the other side of the fence, like to me, when I would do those things, it just bored the hell out of me because I was like, I don't want this structure at all. Like, I want to be like, well, I can play whatever I want. But to people who come from a more organized landscape, it was like comforting. It was like, here's a thing. Okay, I can play that thing. Oh, I only have to make up one like harmonic piece. Yeah, like it gets a little easier to go that route.
No, I also would, I, just to add to that, there is something about reaching a point where you are bored with what you're doing
Yeah,
and you're sitting there thinking, okay, I need to do more. Like I really want to do more. Just let me do more. And reaching that point makes you want to push that envelope and search outwards. And then you're excited about two notes. Oh my
yeah,
gosh. And then I want another chord. And that kind of helps me understand why the whole improvisation kind of exists in many different realms, because a lot of times I even at the core of when I first started learning about jazz, I didn't really understand the general concept.
Mm,
Okay, there's a song, you're improvising solos over the song, and it's cool. It's so cool. Everyone is doing their thing, and everyone has a different approach. But um, when I then, after understanding how this works, would go to a song, I wouldn't really feel like improvising over it. I would listen to it. I'm just thinking, I like the song.
yeah, yeah,
But there's something about, okay, try improvising over it, and you do it so much that you're just tired of it.
yeah.
I want to do it in a different way.
Hmm.
I want to change the chords a bit. You know, let's move on. That sort of thing. I don't know. I know if that's
That's
really
absolutely
how
that.
people think.
No, I think because I think you see that in very specific genres, and this happens in jazz. Like
Mm.
I remembered hearing Miles Davis redid like it was like all blues or some really kind of like simple tune, and he just added all like one little move that was way harder. Um, but in New York, I would experience this a lot because I played a lot of like church. That was kind of half of my career up there was like church gigs. And these churches, you have to think they're playing the same. It's like, okay, here's our hymn for processional, here's our hymn for offering, blah blah blah. And like, you do that every Sunday for 4 years. You're just like, this is awful. Like even if the tune is great, like most people can't live on that thing and hear the same thing, the same song over and over again. And so I think at a certain point it gets to like, how can we make this more interesting? Oh yeah, let's just write one new little like, let's in New York lingo, it's like, let's write a hit. Like you write one little thing that goes into the verse or something like that. um, and then from there on, it kind of branches out into almost being like sport, where you're hearing other churches and it's like, oh, they're playing that hymn, but whoa, they did that move. Okay, cool. Let's take that move and then let's like do our thing with it. But it stems from the thing you're talking about, this need to kind of like just be, to improve it a little bit, kind of out of being bored, and I think this exists outside of music too. I mean, I was a super, I say was as if this is done, but like when I grew up, like super gamer nerdy kid, like just always playing Nintendo and stuff. And like I remember like every now and then you would get like a level where it's like, all right, you could play this same level over again, but now if you get hit once you lose or something. And it was like, all right, yeah, let's go there. Like I know this thing, I can be a little better than what I was. And just that one little like, let's stretch the difficulty, led to so many other things. And like the whole gaming industry shifted because of that. So it would make sense that would happen in music too.
That's an interesting comparison. I wanted to ask you, because we talked about different types of preparation. So when you're about to play and improvise over a song, what is your way of preparing for it?
Ooh, that's a loaded question, but I'm hyped about it because there's a bunch of different stages. Like I think early on, like if you were to ask 21-year-old Nick that question, I would say I'm gonna do the thing that impresses blank. Like my preparation is like it's almost making like the read that a DJ would read over a room. It's like okay, there's this girl in the audience. Like, what's our vibe? Like, what do I need to do to get that? Or the other version of that is like there's a record label, like that whole thing. Like, there's some professional cat who I need to impress. Like, what are they impressed by? And oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes when I was younger, it was like facility. It's like, all right, I'm just gonna burn over this thing or whatever. And then that changed. I mean, it definitely went a bunch of different directions, but it changed, when I kind of got approached my 30s or whatever. I got really philosophical and kind of had this like purity of like, actually, I don't give a damn what they think. Like, I'm gonna do what I want, and I don't even care if it's the best thing. Like, this is what I want to do. This is for me. And so it became like a very subjective. Like, even the preparation for it was like, how am I feeling? What do I want to do? And now, now I feel like, I mean, not like I'm fully matured into super wisdom mode, but I think it's more of I try to. This is gonna sound hippie as hell, but I try and ask myself what the music wants. Like, and that could be a number of things. It could be, and I know you've been in these moments too, where it's like you're playing and it's like, all right, this is deep. Like, I'm in a very, like, this is like beauty personified, and whatever I do next, especially if it's improvisationally, needs to be that. Like, ignore all my wants of like, I want to stretch out and I want to like, talk essentially. It's like, no, like, that's not, this tune is requesting something of me, and I need, if I want this to keep being at the level it is, I need to give it to it. And it becomes more of like a back and forth relationship between you and the song. So there's those moments, and then there still are moments where it's like, all right, I'm with my homies, like, I'm just gonna play all the impressive shit. Like, here we go, and I'm gonna find a way to like reharmonize this or do some little thing I worked on today, or in my circle of friends, like, we're all, not all, but a lot of us are like pretty heavy synth designers, and so we're like, let's see, how can you manipulate the sound differently than that person does, and so you try and do the thing that hasn't been done, but it's very it's, I mean, in reality, it's very in the moment. It's like, what needs to happen right now? Do I need to express myself? Does the song need something? Does the room, I mean, there's even moments where the room needs something. Like, if you're playing a gig and the room is like bored, it's my job then is to say like, no, I don't, like, that's not it. Like, you can't be bored. How can I make you not bored? And so then you approach it that way. But it's way more like philosophical now. Now, granted, I mean, not to blabber on too long, but granted that underneath all that lies a framework of like, well, I need to know the song. Like, if I don't know the song, that's going to be weird. And know the song could also be know what's going to happen with the song, and an example of that would be sorry, my phone's ringing. An example of that would be like, if I'm in a setting, like, one of the groups I play with is fully improvised. It's like a whole band of just like, you make up hip hop tunes, singer makes up a hook, rapper raps, like, it's a thing. So knowing the song there, you're never going to know the changes because they're being made up. But it's almost like knowing, okay, what do I need to listen for? What's everyone's role? So if I start the song and I write a chord progression, the next person's role needs to be like, all right, what's missing harmonically, rhythmically, vibe wise, like what do I need to put on? So knowing the song there and improvising from that place comes from just knowing the scenario. But yeah, way more philosophical and dorky, maybe. I think that's
No, this that's so interesting to me. I love what you said about um, just identifying and looking into what the music needs.
mm,
Because I totally agree with that. Each each music or all music, it wants something. It wants to be somewhere or be a certain way, um, and there are just so many things that make that particular music something as a whole.
mhm,
And I think it's our jobs as musicians to kind of understand how to shape that and how to place that. And depending on where you are, when it is, what music it is, who you're with, all of that feeds into it.
mhm,
Um, I wanted to ask more about when you said knowing the song, when it's not, in the moment, what you just spoke of that group.
mhm.
Is it similar as more classically trained musicians do in terms of you just repeat it, you do study, try to memorize all of the chords? Are you just sitting there in a practice room, um, trying out different things? What's that process like?
No, that's a great question, and in again, there's a few answers to it, but I think generally there's kind of like there's the I say level one, not in like derogatory sense, but just the like in kind of a hierarchical sense of like here's the most important stuff. It's like know the changes, know the melody, know the time, the groove. If it needs a specific feel or something. So there's that stuff, and that for me comes I think everyone has a different version of how they prepare for that. Mine is like, all right, listen a few times and listen with intent. Like, listen of like, all right, first time, get a vibe of just like, all right, that's what it sounds like. Second time through is, how long are each of these sections? And usually, the chord changes aren't like it's something to where they're easy enough to where I can be like, okay, this is 1451 or 1625, whatever. But that has to shift, especially in like gospel world where there's a lot of changes and a lot of hits. Then I'm cutting it up into sections and kind of going back honestly into early classical mode of like, all right, learn these 8 bars. Then we'll get that's one song. Then let's get song two, song three. But then after that, again, a lot of the learning it thing comes into like, all right, well, what am I safe to do? What role do I play here? An example of that would be, if there's a singer, um, probably shouldn't get all like reharmonizy unless I know that they're comfortable with that. Which in church plan, a lot of those singers can hear changes as well as instrumentalists can. So then you're a little safer. But that's part of kind of the preparation is just know the situation. Like am I at church? Am I on a gig? Am I at an audition? Like am I in a room full of like jazzers? Like all those things come into play in terms of like how should I approach this. So yeah, there's definitely a hierarchy in terms of how I work on things, and it depends a bit on the genre or whatever. But to be totally honest, I've tried to position my career in a way to where I only have to do one or two of those things. Like I play in a lot of groups that can improvise really well and that know what I'm strong at, and they hire me because I'm strong at that. And so you're just like, all right, I'm just going to do that. And then if they want something else, then we can correct it at rehearsal or something like that. But yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I think the framework is still very important though. Like knowing the changes, knowing like what's my role here? What am I supposed to do? Am I supporting someone, or should they be supporting me? You know. I mean, how about you?
That's really cool.
Does it depend? I mean, I would imagine, like, do you do a lot of work with orchestras and with other people, or are you mainly playing like kind of like solo piano keyboard situations?
It depends on the season.
Hmm.
I a couple of years ago, I used to do most of my playing and performing with others,
Okay.
so ensemble type. And the rehearsals are very different than how you would rehearse on your own.
Yeah.
But the principles that are beneath it, beneath the details, are similar. It's really about repetition and fine tuning the timing of the phrases.
Mm.
Um, Timing is a huge thing because
Sure.
there's 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 regularity and there's the pulse, but this small subtle changes in the way you start and end phrases together, all of that needs to be um, taken to a point where everyone can do it consistently, accurately, the same way, and everyone's on the same page.
Mhm.
However many times you play it, especially on stage,
Yeah.
and then precisely dialing in what type of emotion am I trying to convey here? Is it expressed in a certain way with articulation or dynamics? And how does that all sound as a whole? And what's the momentum of this section going to the next? And it's really about the shape related things. And I think it's safe to say that classical musicians in general pay a little less attention to the space and the sound aspect,
Yeah.
because a lot of times, um, I mean, I know many string players, especially, and singers, of course, that are hyper aware of, okay, what hall or what type of performance space am I performing in? But maybe I'll say specifically to pianists, a lot of times we're not in control of what instrument we're going to play
Hmm.
on a given night or at a given venue. And so you kind of just do your best in terms of practicing oh, maybe this is not the best thing, and that this is something that I recognize as being kind of sterile about classical music preparation. But you're focused on the accuracy aspect of it,
Sure.
of not just the notes, but all of these tempo, articulation, dynamics, all of that. But that kind of makes you obsessed. Again, going back to the analogy of having the structure of the skeletal frame of it, and then the details on the outside. You're really hyper focused on the details on the outside. So a
Mhm.
lot of times this makes you unstable, or at least for me, it makes me unstable when I'm actually playing, because if one little thing gets off, it's very disturbing
Sure.
and it's not being driven by something um, on the inside. So I've been working a lot on that in the past few years, and I think learning how to improvise and practicing improvisation in different contexts helps me play the repertoire that requires me to just adhere to it note for note, and it's standard repertoire, it's fixed, because I just learned to hear it as a whole as well.
Sure.
But yeah, a lot of preparation is just making sure that it's memorized.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense too. I mean, you mentioned not being in control of the sonic, and there's coming from someone who I feel like sometimes almost always only pays attention to that part. There's a lot of this is funny. It's funny to admit this, but there's a lot of inaccuracies that you can hide that way. Like I feel like, for instance, if I'm phrasing like with a volume knob or a frequency, like messing with the frequencies, if I get to a section that I'm like a little unsure, it's terrible. I'm admitting this, by the way, but if I get somewhere where I'm like unsure of like, damn, what's the exact line, or like if I can't hear someone else or something like that, I'm gonna like fade in a little bit because it makes the entrance like safer, or you're live editing to a certain extent, and a lot of sound design is live editing anyway. But yeah, if you're in a situation where you can't control any of that, I think the accuracy, especially like mechanically and rhythmically, is so much. It's almost more important. I feel like I'm gonna hate that I said that later, but I feel like it's you're gonna notice more if it's off. If you're just like, well, I have a piano and this is my thing, and I can edit it to a certain extent with like damper pedal and sustain pedal, but not really. Like not really.
I was just gonna say that I think the closest parallel would be to just press that damper pedal, which a lot of people do, but you can't really get away with that in most circumstances
Yeah.
where the pedal is not required, and then it's just out of place. But yeah, it's just to me it's very interesting. I feel like uh, I understand that approach because I've lived it, and when I'm preparing for something, I understand that yes, there are differences in from this piano to that piano, this space to that space, but um, I'm just kind of used to thinking, well, that's an external factor. Let me just take care of this here.
Yeah.
Um, I'm beginning to think that there's a lot of use in being aware of
Mm.
that larger context more, and finding ways that you could just play with the space and the potentials of what sounds are possible in whatever context.
Yeah. Do you? So you studied at the? I'm not. My classical knowledge is rather suspect, but you studied at the Glenn Gould School, right?
Yeah, that was the most recent school that I've studied at. I did two different programs there. One was a fellowship, and one was an artist diploma. It's in a school in Toronto, Canada. Um, I think the full name is Royal Conservatory of Music,
I wrote it down.
Glenn Gould School, or
Yeah.
something like that. Something
Yeah.
like that. Prior to that, I studied with this was under a grant, just with some brilliant private teachers. One, Gabriel Taquino, he was a pupil of a very famous French composer, Francis Poulenc.
Mm.
And then Narcisse Bonnet, who's a pupil of a very famous composition slash harmony teacher, Nadia Boulanger.
Okay.
And then before that, I studied at the Juilliard School. That's where I did my bachelor. New York. That's what brought me to New York,
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
for the first 4 years.
That's killing. What was okay? So before I dive into, I really want to get to our tune because I'm hyped to play
Yeah,
everyone.
me too.
But really quick, one last question I wanted to ask you before that is, in given that you've done a lot of educating in various ways, I'm always curious about like if there's something that you were ever, and it's okay if the answer is no, but if there's something that you remember that happened in a lesson where you heard that and it just totally messed you up, like in a good or a bad way, like was there ever something in a lesson that shifted you in a way that you're like, okay, I have to remember that shift, and now I'm going to show that to people, or now I'm going to try and live that. Does that make sense as a question? Like
Or
deep
could
knowledge.
I deep knowledge?
Yeah, like some level of like, oh, I wasn't expecting to hear that.
Mm, I think, oh, I could give you examples of both ends. Um, my professor at Juilliard was very, very good at kind of stopping me from going too far in a certain direction. Um, in terms of I would prepare something maybe sloppily, come to my lesson, just and then he would have a way of just stopping. He would put down the score, and he would just kind of ask, um, "What are you trying to get at here with this music? Like, what do you think this is about?" Where I'm so hyper focused on, oh my gosh, okay, here, this is the hard part with the octaves, and then here it shifts, and now I'm really focusing on the lower register, and over here it gets fast all of a sudden. That's the hard part. I really need to, I'm thinking about all of these details, and he would kind of just stop and say, wait, like, what is the whole picture? Like, what is this music about? And then there was one lesson where um, he asked me if it would be or he asked me to consider reading books on method acting to
Mm,
try and understand how that works, because that can help me get into, I guess, the character of the music as a
yeah.
performer, which
Uh,
was something very new to me. And it actually helped me a lot. It helped me um, go beyond my personality, because prior to that, I feel like the extent of my whatever sides of my personality had,
mhm.
that would be the cap of what I'm able to express in the music. Whereas
Wow.
after I started to learn that, I started to push that boundary even more. So I can bring out sides of me that don't really exist in real life.
Hmm.
It's for the music's sake. I
Sure.
can, dial in this hyper aggressive side, or this hyper, I don't know, whatever it is
Mhm.
that is uncomfortable to me if I were to just be like that.
That's
So
great.
that was really impactful.
Yeah.
um, on the flip side, just to add one more thing, um, I had a lesson where I played an etude, and I really worked hard for weeks to just try to perfect this. And it was during a phase in my life where I just was so obsessed with this perfection aspect of things.
Mm.
I played it in the lesson, and after I played, I thought, okay, wow, that was the best I played it. Really, that was the best I played it. And then my teacher looks at me, he says, oh, that was 98.4% or something like that, some arbitrary number accurate. So you're almost there. I just thought,
Oh.
wait, this is not it. No.
That
And
damn.
he was half joking. He was
Yeah.
half joking, but half serious. And I just realized that at that moment, oh, this perfection accuracy thing has no meaning.
Yeah. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
and it impacted me in that
Yeah.
way where it's just thought, wait, this is just not the point. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Well, it's so interesting. I won't let this. I feel like I want to dive even deeper into the philosophy of that, because there was something else you mentioned in one of your videos, just about the perfection thing, and my whole thought process was like, when did perfection shift to just mechanics? And the reason I think about that is, like, especially nowadays, if you start looking at technology and like artificial intelligence, or you see all these kind of like robots trying to emulate humans, like they can do it in a perfect way, but when we see perfection, it's like, nah, that's not human, like. So it's weird that there seems to be shifts in different music areas into, like, all right, now the performance aspect is the perfect, or then you get into like Coltrane basically just screaming on his saxophone, and his technique's great, but like that's not what it's anyone's thinking about. So it's interesting that aspect. The teacher hears like the notes or the fingerings or something, and is like, that was almost it. It's like,
definitely. I think as humans, we love listening to things and saying things that are human. And we also love seeing that human effort. And I think that's why we're attracted to different types of greatness and different mastery of music or whatever it is, skills.
Mhm.
And that just it's attractive to us because we know how hard it is and how special that is. But there's a point where too much of that takes away from what we experience when we admire that kind of human aspect of things, where once it dials into the robot land where it's sterile and it's predictably perfect,
Mhm.
then it just starts feeling like the opposite effect, even if it took just a ton of effort
Mhm.
to get there.
Yeah.
I think it kind of takes away from what it's trying to achieve, because then you feel less of that edge where you feel the human effort. I don't
Yeah.
know. Maybe that has no basis
No, I think
to anything, but
yeah, I mean, I think it could, and I think there's also like there's probably a bunch of reasons for that. Like I've always thought about like rhythmic accuracy. Like there seems to be some weird connection between like heartbeat and heartbeat tempos to rhythm, and heartbeat tempos are changing depending on the moment. So, there might be some sort of thing where it's like, all right, this rhythm is perfect. It's there every time, but now my attitude shifts or my emotion shifts. So now I need that to shift with me. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things that go into it, but I think what you're talking about, just there's some level of connection with the struggle, connection with the like, oh yeah, you defeated your struggle, but then once someone like seems inhuman because it doesn't seem like there's a struggle anymore, it's not as attractive. It's like if the same team wins a championship over and over again, it's like, all right, the first one was awesome, but like I don't really care about the fifth.
and it's not always even related to that height of things where you're trying to sort of achieve a certain level of intensity. On the flip side, too, I mean, it applies to different ranges of emotions. Where maybe if it's too perfectly crafted, it's just unnatural.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's an interesting topic, and I'm curious to see how things shift as AI and things like that develops further.
That's
We'll see.
that's a whole other podcast, but yes, I'm
I know, yeah.
just as curious about that. Yeah, I remember seeing lately there's been all these like algorithmic programs where it's like if you throw like I saw someone do this with like Eminem or some hip hop artist where they threw all of the lyrics and all of the beats into a program and then it created an Eminem song, and it was like weirdly,
Wow.
yeah, like you heard it and you're like, oh wow, yeah, like this could be on a 90s Eminem, or whatever. Like it sounded sort of there, but there was some element where it was like, all right, the puns like were super quirky, and like it was just too like, here's my strategy and I accomplished it. So there's still parts of that are the they haven't figured out imperfection yet. Which I'm happy about. I
Good
think,
one.
yeah, we do have a job. All right, so I let's play the tune that you sent me. I'm really excited. I'm going to admit this publicly that I'm excited that you didn't slaughter me with time signatures, because I feel like I count to 4 for a living. And so like 3 was, I can deal with 3. Like anything past like 7, and you're going to see me get very amateur very quick. But yeah, this. So here is. Let's see if I can find it. Here is the tune you sent me, and then we'll play my version over it. So here we go, y'all. So killing. So killing. I like
Thank you.
secretly, selfishly wish that I could see your right hand during all that. But I'll figure it out. Okay,
I'm
so that was
excited to hear what you did.
my thought process really quick was there's I wanted to kind of play more of a support role until it was obvious that there was like a space situation being given, because there's some times where it was like, okay, I want to kind of feature your movement, and then at the end it almost had kind of like a like, I mean, it wasn't like jazz head ish, but there were moments where it was like, okay, that's her, now here let me sneak in. And so essentially, and I haven't done this yet on one of these videos, but I played two different parts. So I played like a key bass part because I wanted to just like groove under it, and then I added like this kind of like synth lap steel kind of vibe over the top, just because I was like, this thing is cool. I want to like make it seem like there's a bunch of people here, even though it's just a. So that was my strategy. Let's see if it works, and I'm gonna share my screen with you so you can see it. All right, can you see that? All right.
I can.
Okay. Whew. All right, here we go. This is our tune, both of us. Three people, or two people, three parts. We made it.
Oh, killer. That's so cool. That's awesome.
It was a treat to play over something like that, because there's so many
That's so
options
cool.
what you could do. And I honestly, part of me wishes that I was any good at drum production, because I absolutely would have made like a full band thing out of that, because it was very powerful. Like that's a, even though it's like a short little piece of music, it's something that had like very obvious depth to it, which is like it felt like a song, which is cool. So yeah, I got to. I feel like for one of these videos, I had to do my little fake lap steely stuff.
This is really, really, really cool. Did it take you a while to decide on which sounds to use?
Honestly, no, and that's not a slight. Like when I heard it, it's I default to like groove world, and so instantaneously my thought process was like, okay, normally I would think what instrument to play, but you already had kind of done some like Rhodes and piano stuff. So my thing is like, all right, well, let me go Synth Planet, and let me go Groovy Synth Planet, which those two things are Keybase land for me. So got to go there.
That's so cool.
And then the like lap steely stuff, which is essentially, it's just Rhodes that I'm controlling with a volume pedal and has like pitch bendy stuff happening. Um, that part was cool because I just followed your melodies and your movements. So I survived it.
Awesome. It makes me want to get a volume pedal. This is something that I have not experimented with
Mm.
so far.
It's really, especially, I
But
don't know that
yeah,
you'd be able to do those tricks on the reface because there's not a pitch bend, but like you could do some really interesting things.
on
And
the CP88,
Mhm.
yeah.
to where you can route everything to volume, and the thing, and it takes a little bit of like technique practice, but being able to like fade in while you're bending into a note
Hmm.
gives you that guitar-y kind of like phrasing thing happening. And especially if you throw like a ton of effects, like
That's
either reverb or
cool.
delay or something on it, it's like it's like atmospheric but still alive a little bit, you know. Because that's always something that I've, without going into a long like sound diatribe, like I or dialogue, I've always like pads to me are interesting, but you can't phrase a pad like you would like a lead sound, right? Or like a piano because it doesn't move as quickly. So I've always wanted like a pad sound to be more expressive harmonically. And so the volume plus pitch combo really makes that kind of like doable. And it's tricky, but it's super fun once you get it down.
It's cool.
I
It's
would,
really, really awesome.
I would,
What are you using? What keyboard are you using there?
so that was
I've
the
seen it in the previous episodes, but
yeah, the YC61.
I see.
Yeah, it's a beast. It's an absolute beast. Yamaha, send her a YC61.
No, I have the 88.
Oh, you have the 88. Well, I secretly want you to have the
Yeah.
61 too, so that you can do even more like mod stuff. But because the
Oh,
88,
is the 61
because
how
do
it's
you have
different in terms
you
of
have the one, it doesn't have drawbars and stuff on it, right? You don't have like the
it
organ,
does have drawbars.
but do you have like the physical ones, like the physical drawbars?
Mm-hmm. I think
Oh,
so.
wow. Okay, so you use
Yeah.
the big version of it. All right, never mind, Yamaha.
Yeah, I think I just have the and that's what I did for so our track together has four different parts because
Oh,
mine is the top piano part
yes.
with the bottom organy thing.
Okay.
And I just layered so each part that I'm playing, except for the piano one, or
Yeah.
the part with the organ is organ plus Rhodes.
Wow. Okay. Oh, there is organ in it.
So
Okay.
so we
Yeah.
have four, yeah.
Kill.
Yeah, a little bit just on the bottom. Yeah.
Super two-person orchestra.
Not very good. I'm not very good at, you know, designing that the sound aspect of things, but I I like I like playing around with it a lot.
Yeah. It's a whole. I mean, I'm. I feel like I have a synth thing down, but I run into problems on like the mixing end because I just me and sitting in front of computers for like 8 hours at a time, which I think is like a prereq to being good at mixing, is you just really love like sitting and staring at a screen, which is tricky.
Definitely.
It's a whole other podcast, but thank you. All right, this has been a great conversation. Thank you for doing this. And
Yes.
anything you want to like advertise? You had a record come out, right? You recently?
Last year, last September, it's something that I just made on my own,
Amazing.
all original music. I was going to record it somewhere else, but I recorded it in the studio, but I ended up doing it all myself and
Amazing.
engineering it. So it was a learning experience.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Other than that, my stuff is on YouTube.
Amazing.
That's where you
Yeah.
can find the most
Your
things.
your channel is fabulous. I mean, it literally touches on like it's like
Thank
everything
you.
from super education stuff to like just like here's a fun thing I'm doing. Like it really touches kind of like every part of music, which is like really rad and really
Thank you.
yeah. Everyone check that out if you haven't already. Um, and yeah, thank you
It was
for
a pleasure to talk to you, Nick.
yeah, pleasure hanging out with you. I'll let Yamaha do the fades thing, but yeah, this has been. Thank you everyone for listening. This has been the Yamaha Behind the Synths podcast. Take care.